Ladies and gentlemen, good evening if you're in Japan or Asia, good morning in Europe like myself. Welcome to this webinar. Also welcome to you if you are listening to this on a later moment and you've downloaded the recordings. Let's see if I can click through. There we go. The title of the webinar for this evening / morning is Solar Market Regulations and O&M Developments in Japan. My name is Stefano Kruku. I'm a project manager at Solarplaza, involved in this in the Japan conference we're setting up. I'll tell more about it in a second. And I'll be introducing our two speakers in a minute. So the agenda for today will consist of a short introduction from my side. It shouldn't be taking longer than 5 minutes. Then we'll switch to the first presenter of today, Izumi Kaizuka of RTS Corporation, one of our most important partners and one of the most well-known consultancy firms in Japan. After which we will switch to Martin Mesmer of GSSG Solar. He will talk with us about several market trends with a focus on O&M in Japan. There will be time for questions and answers on your questions, and we'll end the webinar in approximately 1 hour from now. So this webinar, as I mentioned, is a prequel to one of our yearly conferences that we organize at Solarplaza, the Solar Asset Management Asia Conference. Will already be the 3rd edition taking place early June in Tokyo. It is absolutely the region's leading conference dedicated to the operational phase of solar plants and portfolios, including the topics obviously of O&M and asset management, portfolio management. We see it as one of the must-attend conferences in Japan, international focused, bilingual, and it's a mix of local professionals and international people either based in Japan or involved in Japanese markets. We expect over 250 attendees this year, has been growing, about 50 speakers and approximately 15 sponsors and exhibitors. If you're watching this webinar, you're planning to register for the conference, I would say make sure you will use the discount code of RTS as our partner on your registration. You can look this up later when you download the slides. I should maybe have mentioned this earlier about Solarplaza for the people that are not familiar with us. We are a global information platform for solar PV. You can see our mission lined out here. Our main business, I would say, is organizing high-level B2B events, conferences and trade missions, over 80 so far in the last 12 years, in more than 25 countries, and our network of solar professionals for the whole chain from investor to technical advisor and service provider is growing every day, is now about 60,000. Some practical notes before we start. There will be poll questions during the presentations and the discussion, which means the speakers and myself will actually ask questions to you as audience. Please be involved and share your thoughts or opinion in there. It's anonymous and it gives us interesting input to comment on. Do you have any technical issues? Please use the chat box on the right. My colleagues are aiming to help you out with anything that's going wrong, and obviously I hope there is nothing going wrong, but if there's something, please write it there. Your questions to the speakers, please also write them in the chat box on the right, and obviously the presentation slides and recordings will be made available afterwards. So I want to start with introducing our first speaker. I already mentioned her, Izumi Kaizuka, Research Division Manager at RTS Corporation. She focuses on conducting research projects as a PV market industry analyst. She used to be researching for METI and other government organizations, research institutes and PV companies in Japan, but definitely also a lot of international companies making use of her and RTS services. And I'll also take the chance to quickly introduce the second speaker, so we don't have to do that later on. Mr. Martin Mesmer, he is Director of Operations at GSSG Solar, I would say one of the leading solar developers active in Japan. His role is to ensure that the projects within the GSSG solar portfolio are designed and built to the highest quality and performance standards. In the past, he has overseen the technical design, negotiation and implementation of over 300 megawatts of PV plants in Japan and approximately a gigawatt internationally. So I look forward, Martin, to hear your expertise and vision here on Japanese focused topics. So back to Izumi and Kaizuka. Izumi, I'm going to make you presenter right now. Please have your screen open on presenter mode, and I'll be unmuting you right now. 1 second, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefano. Today I'd like to talk about the market status and the overview of the revision of the renewable energy law.
Thank you. Go ahead, Izumi. We can see your screen, so the floor is yours.
See my screen? Okay, thank you. こんばんは。おはようございます。Good morning and good evening, everybody. And before my presentation, I'd like to introduce you to the RTS Corporation. My company founded in 1983 years. And since then, more than 34 years, we served for the PV industry, and especially for the we provide the market intelligence plus the consulting service for the suppliers of the components or project developers or EPCs as well as investors of PV. And we have many clients in many countries from Asia to Europe. And please visit our website for your information. And today I'd like to give the status of the Japanese PV market and the feed-in tariff program, because this is important to know the government's motivation to revise the feed-in tariff program. Then I give the key points of the new rules under the revised feed-in tariff program. Then I give the outlook of the Japanese market. But I have to give the very important notion, because most of the information in this my presentation based on the documents published by METI. I recommend you checking the original Japanese document if you are developers. And actually the METI started the seminars about the new rules from last weeks, and yesterday the METI just published new documents about the revision. And actually we are revising our slides almost every day. But if you need more detailed information, please contact me, because my company can give the more detailed information in English or give the presentation both in Japanese or English. Yes. The first, I'd like to give you the situation of the market in Japan. As you may know, the feed-in tariff program started in July 2012, and the 2015 was I think the peak of the market. The newly installed capacity reached 10.8 gigawatt, and 2016 the market little bit shrinked, but still our estimation of the new capacity is 8.6 gigawatt. And this year, of course, we will have the new rules started in this April, but still we have the large pipelines. So we think the 2017, this year market, still we have the 7.8 to 8.25 gigawatt of the installation. Now I'd like to talk about the status of the feed-in tariff program. After the government started feed-in tariff program, you can see the capacity, total capacity of the approved project. Now we have the more than 80 gigawatt. And this is the status as of the September 2016. As of the September last year, we still have 50 gigawatt pipelines. And this figure shows the approved capacity and commissioned capacity. You can see in case of the under 50 kilowatt or 2 megawatt or more, the commissioned ratio is very low. And among the 50 gigawatt of the pipelines, the under 50 kilowatt or 2 megawatt and more so-called mega solar accounts for more than 80%. And these huge pipelines, we have the so-called paper project. So the government wants to cancel those paper projects with the revision of the new program. And also, this chart shows the approved project by fiscal year. In 2013, it was the peak of the application of the project. And the government also concerning the burden for the future feed-in tariff. And still, we have the many pipelines with a higher feed-in tariff. But among those pipelines includes the unrealistic project. This is one of the intention to revise the feed-in tariff law. And later I will explain the government will change the setting feed-in tariff level and tender program. Okay, from now on, I'd like to talk about the overview of the feed-in tariff program. After about 4 years, the government decided to revise the renewable energy law, feed-in tariff law, and the revision passed the May of the last year. Most of the items will be implemented from this April. But the aiming, the intention of the revision is the first, the government wants to realize the PV project, and the government also wants to ensure the proper power generation business plan, and also achieving the cost reduction of the PV system. And of course, the government also consider the future off-taker after the Japanese electricity market reforms, and transparency for grid connection. And also the government tries to tackle with the problem of the exemption of the surcharges. But today, I'd like to focus the new approval scheme and the overview of the tender program, and also the addressing the safety of the PV systems, and because this is related to the O&M market in Japan.
Izumi-san, I believe yes, we have the poll question to the audience at this point before you move forward. So let's see, we will put that up in the meantime. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I will read up the questions for the audience. Let's see what they think. So if you're attending this webinar, please share your thoughts on this. So what are your main doubts or what are your main concerns with regards to the new regulation reform in Japan, either from your own vision experience or the people you deal with in the market, how they see this? So would it be mostly regarding to the new FIT scheme, feed-in tariff scheme, the new tender system, the changed approval procedures, or other things? Please go ahead and vote. We'll give you a couple of seconds for that before we look to the at the results of this. And yeah, maybe you can share after that, Izumi-san, if this is in line with what you see in the market or expect from people. Looking at my colleague, do we already have quite some answers? Can we show them? Yeah, let's look at them. Okay, there we go. Izumi-san, I think you cannot see this, so I'll read it up. 38% of the people answering says my main concerns or doubts are related to the feed-in tariff scheme. 40% roughly says this is related to the tender system. At almost 50% says the approval procedures are of main concerns. And the remaining 20% says these are other things in the market that concern you most. So is this in line with what you see? Most people worried or concerned about approval procedures and a bit less about feed-in tariff and tender system?
Okay. So then I go to the points of the new approval procedure. Okay?
Yes, please. That's fine. Let's move forward. We should be able to see your slides again. Yeah, go ahead.
But I can't. Okay. This shows the points of the new approval schemes, and before April of this year, the approval is just for the approval for facility. The approval means just checking the eligibility of the PV systems. But from this April, the approval it means for the business plan. And the requirement under new procedures, the project developers or owners has to submit the proper business plan. And the project developers or owners are required to realize stable and efficient power generation. And in case of the violation of the compliance rules, I will explain later, the eligibility of a feed-in tariff or right to receive feed-in tariff might be cancelled. This is the major change of the one of the renewable energy law. And this is quite busy slide. But if you see the right part, this part, you will see the criteria for new rules. And one of the important things is the business. That means power generation business shall comply with these criteria. And the project developers are required to conduct reliable operation of the PV power plants. So the developers or owners, even for the owners of the existing PV power plant, are required to show that their project is complying these criteria. So the developers or owners have to submit the business plan to METI. And this is also the little bit busy chart. But now we are in the so-called blackout period. At this time, the METI will not receive any application. And after March 30, the former rules will be dissolved and new approval will be started from April, 1st of the April. And the former project approved under the former law, those projects will be in the stage of the deemed approval. And by September 30, the end of the September, the developers or owners have to submit business plans. Then those projects can get new approval, so-called business approval. And depending on the date of the grid connection contract, the project have to commissioned within 3 years or 3 years or later. And this is a very simple description of the what is rules have to comply. These items are aiming the safety or proper power generation business. And for example, for the safety reasons, the new criteria requires installation of the fence and the signboard showing who is the developer, who is the contact person, or something like that. And also the new rules stipulated that the obligation to consent for output curtailment or the proper disposal of the equipment after the 20 years. And with the submission of the required documents, the developers or owners has to submit several documents like corporate registration number or documents showing the signing date of the grid connection or locations of the fences and signboard in the drawing. And actually the METI recently published guideline for the business plans. Though I recommend you to go to the this link to make sure what is you need to continue the project or to keep the eligibility receiving the feed-in tariff. Then I'd like to move to the different topics. One of the major purpose of the revision of the new tariff program is the setting rules for the feed-in tariff level. Formally, the government changed the feed-in tariff level every fiscal year. And the setting feed-in tariff based on the installation cost plus IRR the government set. But the former scheme, unfortunately, did not lead the cost reduction of the PV systems in Japan. So this is the reason the government changed the setting rules for the feed-in tariff level. And one of the items is tender program for 2 megawatt or more projects. And this is a very busy chart, but this shows the feed-in tariff level from 2017. For example, under 10 kilowatt PV system, the government set the feed-in tariff until 2019. And the less than 2 megawatt, the PV with 10 kilowatt and between 10 kilowatt and 2 megawatt, the government set the new tariff for next fiscal year. Now the 2 megawatt more system is subject of the tender scheme. And here is the overview of the tender scheme. The tender program, the project developers can get the right to apply for the feed-in tariff approval. And the tender for the feed-in tariff will be decided by the tender price plus capacity. And the ceiling bidding price is for next fiscal year is 21 yen per kilowatt hour. And this will be the uniform tender throughout of Japan. And we are expecting the guidance for implementing tender programs will be published in this month, but not yet available. And how to select the project? It will be the pay-as-bid procedure. And some of the points I have to tell you that before tender, the project developer has to obtain the grid connection capacity. And of course, the project has to meet all the criteria I already explained. And important thing is the applicants has to pay the guarantee deposit. First guarantee deposit is 500 yen per kilowatt hour. And second guarantee deposit is, this is quite high, 1,500 yen per kilowatt. And how to pay this deposit is not clear at now. But anyway, the project developer has to pay this deposit. And the schedule of the tender is announced. The first tender will be started in September. And the first tender, the METI will invite total 500 megawatt of the project. Then in 2018, the 2 times of the tender is planned. And as I said, the details of the tender not clear, but soon we will see the guidelines from the government. And as far as I discussed with my clients, most of the clients want to see the result of the first tender. And of course, most of the developers are busy with the formally approved project. So I'm not sure the government can get the 500 megawatt of the project or not. Okay, and now I'd like to move to the safety issues of the PV systems. After implementing the feed-in tariff projects, programs, we have many problems resulted by the PV systems. So the government wants to implement more strict rules about the operation and maintenance. And I do not have details about the guidelines of the operate and maintenance today, but now there are many companies entering into this market. And the level of the operation and maintenance totally differ by the players. But soon I think the providers that can give the efficient operation and maintenance will get more share in the Japanese market. But at now, I think too many players are offering their services. But I'm sure that this segment will be the most attractive market that we can expect the growth in Japan. So now I need to summarize my presentation, so I want to give some outlook. We consider the revision of the feed-in tariff and also the physical grid connection capacity. So the market will be gradually stabilized in the future, but still we believe we can continue the maybe 4 to 5 gigawatt market in the future. Currently, the government's target by 2030 is 64 gigawatt. But we believe that this target number we can reach around 2020, and Japan has the potential to have the more than 100 gigawatt of the PV. But because of the limitation of the grid connection capacity, at now the Tokyo or Chubu Electric or Kansai Electric area has more spaces for the grid connection capacity. But those areas lack of the spaces. So soon we believe the Japanese market will shift to the rooftop market or self-consumption market. But the cancellation of the existing approval which blocked grid connection capacity also make some space for the new projects, I believe. So this is a summary outlook and my summary of my presentation. In Japan, the former feed-in tariff program created huge pipelines, almost 50 gigawatt. But with the revision of the renewable energy law, the only concrete project will remain as pipeline. Maybe we will see the result after the end of the September. And the cancellation of the paper project is expected to create new space for the grid connection capacity. But at now, the impact of the tender process is not clear. And the operation and maintenance business will be active. Market will be gradually stabilized, but I think Japan has more potential to achieve 100 gigawatt market. But the market will shift to rooftops in the future. Okay, thank you for listening. And we have the booth in the PV Expo. Please visit our booth for more detailed information. Thank you.
Thank you, Izumi-san, for your detailed presentation and also for the summary. I'll be visiting you in 2 weeks in Tokyo at PV Expo. Looking forward to that. We take one short question right now, if you agree, before we move to Martin's presentation. So let me read up the question for you. Talking about the paper projects that you referred to, what will happen to the projects that will be cancelled, that will be dropped? Are they just disappearing? Can they be taken over by another company under similar conditions?
I think both, but to get first the currently approved project required to sign the grid connection contract with utilities by the end of the March. And if the grid connection contract not be completed, I'm not sure the exact date, but the METI will automatically cancel the project.
Okay,
And
so if this contract is not in place by end of March,
yeah,
there is no chance to take over project, right? Clear. Yeah, many of the topics, actually all of the topics you introduced will be discussed at the conference as well. There are more questions, so we'll come back to you, Izumi, after Martin's presentation. I'm going to mute you now, and I will be unmuting Martin. So Martin, I hope you are on standby. You have your slides ready. Yes, Martin, did you receive the request for sharing your screen?
So can you hear me?
We can hear you.
And
can you...
Are the slides visible?
Control L will work. Yes, can you put it on presentation mode?
Let's see, is that better?
Yes, I think it is. Control L, that will help.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Excellent. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Martin, and thank you, Kaizuka-san, for the very intense presentation. Very informative. My presentation will be a little bit lighter. One point I'd like to point out, the last presentation is on slide 10. You will have seen the new regulations for O&M, which have become a little bit more stringent than before. And I believe that the reason for that is that some of the operators didn't know what they were doing or didn't do a good job, and now the general industry will pay for the mistakes of the first few who didn't know what they were doing. We've seen a similar trend in the racking, and I'll talk about that in a later slide. So what I'll be talking about is the operations in mountains, why that will happen. That's one of my predictions, that we will install in mountains that are undulating rather than flattening the mountain on a relatively flat area. There's a note on GIS code change and the potential value of drones as a final point. I don't think I will have time for point 4, so let me get right into it. So the first thing is, Japan is very mountainous. It's a volcanic island with earthquakes. It's still alive. There's it's quite an interesting terrain, and having built a few megawatts in the southwest of the United States on trackers, coming to Japan was a bit of a culture shock. The cost in the U.S. also was lower 3 years ago, and is still lower today by a significant margin. There's a few reasons for that. One of the main reasons is the grading. And they can be somewhere, the grading costs can be somewhere between 15 to 55 yen per watt. Transmission lines, I found, are also more expensive because there are many more landowners you have to deal with. The companies to install them tend to be more expensive, and the way they are installed, it usually takes a little bit more time because of the terrain. So there's a couple of reasons why projects are still more expensive to build here in Japan than they are in other parts of the world. But the prices are coming down. The same, by the way, goes for O&M, which we will talk about in a second. So another, as I mentioned, flat land is scarce. That will make, it's getting scarcer because all the flat land that was available has been built out, or the flat land that was easy to get to has been acquired and projects reserved on it. And that with the pressure on the feed-in tariff, or now the PPAs going down, the pressure building up, it means that you have less money available on the front side. So your CapEx has to be reduced. And one of the ways to do that is to just grading. The limits that you have to slope are the piling machines. And the next slide I'll talk about these piling machines. If I use piles to my my racking system, the limitation in the machine that installs the pile, not the piles themselves. The guide machines that are 30 if they have an implement. But if you want to go to a Mesmer from Switzerland, it's like a spider that crawls up the mountain. That costs almost 10x of a guide. So there's a need to change the structure of the racking as we move to mountainous terrain without grading. So the three solutions that are commonly discussed, actually the two that are commonly discussed are solar sharing, which you see on the right bottom, and then floating systems on lakes or ponds that you see at the bottom picture. But I haven't seen many people talk about next generation rack. Again, machines can't go up steep slopes, so you have to find ways to install modules on steep slopes without having to use large machines. This is one of the machines I'm talking about. This is what I just used, or what my EPC used on a 50 megawatt site that we're currently installing. The machines can handle 300 piles, up to 300 piles a day with one team if it's trained well, but only 50 in undulating terrain. And they're limited by size. And on the top left I have a car icon there to give you a cost comparison of what this machine costs. This, and some of you will chuckle now, is the Mesmer spider, I call it, that can go on steeper terrain, but I guess you can see why it costs a bit more than the guy. So buying these machines is lets you install on steeper terrain, but the cost is going to be prohibitive going forward in many cases. So we come to the first questionnaire.
Yes.
I'll let Kamal take over.
Yes, thank you, Martin. We will put up the poll question for the audience. So to your experience or knowledge, because I can imagine grading is not something you deal with on a daily basis, but what you've heard or seen from your partners or clients, what are average prices of grading in Japan? Martin, maybe you can briefly mention what you define and do not define as grading so that people know how to answer.
So taking a CapEx approach, if your project is, well, let's take around 200 yen per watt to install, which is an old number. It's below that these days. But if you take out of that 5 cents or 5 point something yen, maybe even 6 yen now with the exchange rate, that would be a less than 5 cents per watt peak project.
Clear. Okay, so the potential answers are less than $5 per watt peak, somewhere between 5 and 25 cents per watt peak, between 25 and 50 cents per watt peak, or even more than 50 cents per watt peak. Please make your vote right now, or your best guess, I would say. You have a couple more seconds to do so.
So the Japanese word for grading in this case would be zose. So it's it doesn't include deforestation.
Thank you, Martin. Do we have some answers already we can look at? Okay, we will demonstrate them right now. Give me a second, Martin, to read it up for you. So 1/3 of the people exactly says this is between 5 and 25 cents per watt peak. 37% of the people says this is between 25 and 50 cents per watt peak. And 30% of the people, the remaining 30%, says this is more than 50 cents per watt peak. So it's quite evenly distributed over but nobody thinks it's less than 5 cents, obviously. Is this what you expected people to answer?
Yes.
Would you? Okay.
This is very much in line with what I had expected. The less than 5 cents per watt peak, by the way, is the price that I used to pay in the United States.
Yeah,
and it doesn't.
Not in Japan. Okay. No. We will go back to your slides. Go ahead.
All right. So GIS is changing, and that will have an impact on racking. The new rules should be coming out in April. They were actually expected last year already by some of the EPCs, but were procrastinated. The nice thing is that they are they differentiate between racking outside of a field and racking inside a field, where the racks that are more exposed to wind at the outside of a large field have to be stronger than the ones inside. The downside is that the overall cost of racking could potentially go up when the new regulations come out. Why is the code changing? Well, Japan is a bit of a special place in that it has earthquakes and snow loads, and when you go away from further away from the coast, and wind loads, specifically typhoons. So in a worst case scenario, you have to assume all three things hitting you at the same time, which is, of course, statistically a very low likelihood. But depending on the MEDI section, they're going to enforce that rather rigorously. One area that's been talked about quite often is the total committee, where the racking is being very, how shall I say, fine-combed, or looked at with a fine comb. The special interest group influence, I just put there with a question mark. I've seen a few things that I could not explain in Japan. Why, for example, people don't use copper, aluminum cable between the combiner box and the inverter. It's only in Japan that they use almost exclusively copper. Some EPCs resist strongly against using aluminum, but international EPCs can usually do that. So there's a couple of things that are very peculiar here in Japan that I can sometimes only ascribe to influence of special interests in the behind the scenes. So let me move on to the next chapter that's very press or very hot for O&M and even construction, and that's the drones. So we've been lucky to have drones available for the construction of this site. And the photo that you see in the bottom right was actually taken with a drone. This is a little bit of an older project. The construction was halfway done at that time. I see some companies now thinking of, okay, how can we use these drones to reduce labor cost? We mentioned, I mentioned before that O&M costs are coming down. They're somewhat adjusting to an international standard, I would say. In some areas where there's up to 2 meters of snow, like parts of Gifu or well, some remote areas of Nagano or Fukushima, may see 1.5 to 2 meters of snow. In that case, you don't want to have to send out a person stomping through the snow if you can do it with a drone. That would be one of the areas where you might be able to save some time on the O&M. There's a automation of drone operation that we will see, I believe, in about 5 years. You will see drones starting and inspecting and going back to home base and landing and recharging on their own, just pre-programmed. Another nice part of drones, and this is what this picture was, is a check on project progress or construction progress, where you can have, excuse me, you can have the drone go out in regular intervals and create a series of screenshot or photos from the same vantage point and get a nice history of the construction and actually analyze how people construct to some degree. The cameras tend to be the tricky part here. When you have a camera that has high resolution from a long distance, and by long distance I mean more than 10 meters, then the camera can easily cost more than the drone. So the software is also a very big part that's often underestimated. Software is getting better, where drones can automatically avoid being blown away by the wind or running into objects. Another thing that you can do with drones during construction is the shading. If you look at the picture on the bottom right, one of the things we wanted to look at was what's the shading at a certain time of day, and you can see tree shading on the bottom left. That brings me to the next question. What do you think drones, where do you think they will have the greatest impact? So I'll hand it over to you for a second here. Stefano?
Yes, thank you, Martin. The poll question is open for the attendees. So where do you think the greatest impact, or let's call it added value, of drones will be? Is it in evaluation of the site during construction phase, related to O&M, or anything else? Let's see what the people in the webinar think. You have the chance to vote right now. Please do so. Okay, a few more seconds. Let's look at the answers. Let's see what people think. Okay, well, Martin, I think you're not seeing this, so I'll tell you. Only 8% says this is construction phase added value. 38% of the people says, well, regarding site evaluation, the value of drones will be greatest, and 53%, so the big majority, says this is related to O&M. I assume that's in line with your personal opinion?
Well, I think there will be some savings or some additional value in surveillance that may lead to insights into new ways of constructing. But generally speaking, I'm not surprised by this result. I would like to know from the audience what O&M improvements they see. That would be something, an interesting feedback for those who have my email address. Okay, I will move on to the, oh, no, I don't want to move on to the last slide. There was one topic I wanted to talk about, which was distributed generation. The former speaker, Kaizuka-san, already mentioned that rooftop installations will increase. This may bring with it some aggregation, but for the lack of time, I would skip this topic. And with that,
okay,
we can open it up for questions.
Yes, well, thank you, Martin. Maybe we will discuss this topic in the upcoming webinars, and definitely at the conference. I'm muting you right now and sharing my own screen again. Actually, I would like to, before we go to the couple of questions that are left for Martin and Kaizuka-san, let's see, yeah, share a Last poll question with the audience related to our upcoming webinar we are organizing. Let's see if this works. We're putting it up right now, actually. Could you, as panelists, let us know what your preference has in terms of a topic for the upcoming webinar we're organizing? We mentioned 4 different topics here. Let us know, and if there is a big majority vote, we'll probably focus on that. A couple more seconds. Thanks for your cooperation here. Let's see what people think. Okay, I'm not seeing the answers here right now. Yes, I do actually. Comparison of Japanese international O&M approach. Okay, will still be an interesting and difficult choice to make. We will try to take this into account. Thank you for voting. Question and answer time. Let's use 5, 6, 7 more minutes to answer a couple of questions. First, still staying with you, Martin. You mentioned floating solar and shared solar as solutions for less space, but of course, as Izumi-san already introduced, rooftops will be more and more, rooftop solar will be more and more popular, which makes a lot of sense. So one of the questions that logically came up is, what is the advantage then of ground-mounted PV to rooftop solar projects? There are a lot of big rooftops as well, but you pointed to other solutions compared to building in mountainous terrain.
So my experience is in utility scale solar, or as they say in Japanese, mega solar. I don't profess to know enough about the rooftop market to smartly speak about that.
Okay, fair enough. But do you see it indeed, the market shifting to this sector as Kaizuka-san predicted?
We've seen this in other countries as well, and it's it's definitely a trend I would anticipate.
Okay, Martin, would you? There's also a question that comes up right now. I'm just reading it up. Would you praise METI now for reviving the sector with the new regulations? Do you think they are actually doing a good job with this? Again, this is partly personal opinion, of course, but what would you say about that?
So I like the aspect of reducing the cost of solar. We don't need expensive solar. Solar needs to be able to compete, and maybe we get to a world where no energy form is subsidized anymore. And I'm hinting at my. I like how Elon Musk mentioned that, where he was basically fighting oil to some degree. METI all I think did the right thing by trying to kill the zombie projects or the paper projects, as Kaizuka-san mentioned.
Clear. Do you see Japanese families, but let's say also businesses, open for rooftop installations based on what you see around you living in Japan?
So when you drive through Nagano, which is high elevation, high sunshine, you see a very high proportion of the folks having modules on their roof. So I would anticipate that this will proliferate here as well. Not just in countries, but Japan will follow suit, I think, especially in the sunny areas.
Clear. Okay, thank you, Martin. I'll have a couple more questions for Izumi-san that I'll try to cover quickly, so I'll be muting you now, Martin. Thanks again.
Yes,
Izumi-san,
Stefano.
Yes.
Stefano, before the questioning, I'd like to add some of the rooftop segment.
Yeah, go ahead. What do you
government is making new building efficiency code by 2020, and achieving new efficiency codes. I think most of the residential new houses need solar. Maybe the commercial buildings achieving those efficiency codes only by solar is difficult, But solar will be a good item to achieve the tight building codes.
Interesting. So another driver for that sector, basically.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for the addition. A few short questions, if possible. If there is a short answer, that would be great. Someone is asking, for the tender program, is there a deadline for completion of the project after the tender is awarded?
Yeah, I think that they have the deadline, of course. And if the deadline cannot complete the due date, the terms of the feed-in tariff payment will be reduced.
Okay. Is there a grace period for projects over 2 megawatts for the FIT? When will they be completely phased out?
By the end of the September, the project developer has to submit the new business plan. I think this is kind of the transitional period, and it depends on the project. Some of the grandfathering maybe gives. That it depends on the when you get approved and when you get the contract of the grid connection.
Okay. You mentioned, Izumi-san, in your presentation, appropriate responses should maintain grid stability. And one of the attendees is asking, so does this mean that storage could or should be included?
Storage not be the obligation, not included, but of course the government now promote the storage for the large-scale projects, and some utility companies request to have the storage for the very specific area as well. But the transparency for the grid connection, that means the disclosure of the grid connection situation for the utility companies.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you, Izumi-san. Thank you very much for your involvement here. I have one last question actually to Martin still. So Martin, I hope you're still here. Let me unmute you. It's regarding the topic of the chief electrical engineer in the Japanese market and the costs related to this. What has been your experience with the companies you've worked with? Is this an issue? Is this different than in other markets?
The connection dropped off a little bit there. Repeat the last sentence.
Sure. I was asking regarding the topic of the chief electrical engineer in Japan, the costs of this. What has been your experience with the companies you've worked with? Is this specific in Japan? Is it different than other markets? What can you share with us about it?
I think the role of the CEE or the Shunin is a little bit broader here than in the United States. In the United States, you do have to have professional engineers sign off on the plans that you submit, but I don't think you have external PEs or owner PEs supervising the site. You have engineers that represent the owner, so you do have owners engineers and you have engineers on the ground during construction, but I think the role, especially also during operation, may be a little bit more enhanced here. The cost, I don't think, is much higher here. There's not the labor costs are actually not as high as you may expect.
Okay, well, interesting to discuss further. Martin, thank you as well. Let's round off with the webinar because of time, of course. So I want to, before we end, quickly announce the GPVE meeting Martin is involved in and organizes. Here you see a couple of details. We will also link this to the follow-up email of this webinar, and if you have any questions about that, we will enable you to reach out to Martin. I've heard this is a very interesting and unique networking opportunity that comes up every couple of weeks. So if you are in Tokyo, keep an eye on it, or make sure to attend. I'll try to be there myself as well. Thank you again. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you as attendees for your input and participation. I hope obviously this webinar has been of value to you. If you have any questions, follow-up comments, remarks, please contact either myself or my colleague Saori-san. You see her details here as well. We hope to meet you at the upcoming conference that I've already introduced earlier, or at any of our other Solarplaza events coming up in the coming months, either our trade mission in Indonesia, the conference in Nigeria, in Argentina, our big Solar Asset Management North America conference coming up end of March in San Francisco, or again in Tokyo. I wish you a great evening or a very nice day and look forward to be in touch soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.